right, so all set to go then?
Yes.
Okay, in that case, we'll call the March 23rd meeting of the Oregon City Historic Review Board to order at 7:02 p.m. First on the agenda would be any public comments not related to items on the agenda tonight. If we have any of those, I don't think we do. Okay, in that case, we'll move to the first item on the agenda for this evening, which is Preservation Grant Application 2101, window repair on the Arthur Howland House at 515 High Street.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm going to share my screen to show the staff report and the photos that that applicant submitted, and give it just a quick summary. So our grant program is a 50-50 matching program. Window repair is one of a few different types of projects that we can fund. It's only available to designated structures. The application here is for about $750 or up to that amount for window repair of between 5 and 7 windows on the Arthur Howland House. And so far this year, we've awarded $3,000 to a single project. 1,000 is guaranteed, and the 2,000 is available if that project, if that money is not taken by another project before the end of the fiscal year. So we have available funds for this grant. We have $5,000 per year, per fiscal year. So it's not spoken for yet. And this project would, again, repair some historic wood windows. And let me share to show you the photos. The applicant did share 2 bids and wants to go with the lower bid. It's a licensed contractor. You can see the damage here. The repair work is reglazing in some cases, and kind of chip repair, repainting of the windows, and kind of adjusting them so that they actually open and close properly. So it's pretty straightforward, and I recommend that we award the funds, and or that you award the funds, and that apologize for the noise, and that there are conditions of approval about when the funds need to be used, and those are standard to all grants. So there's no specific conditions for this application, just the standard grant conditions, and that's all I have.
Okay, thanks, Kelly. Is the applicant here? Do you want to say anything, or? I think you're on mute there.
Hi, I'm Vicki Yates. I'm here. I think Kelly pretty much covered it. There are about 5 windows. I'm sorry, I said 7 windows in the pictures. I meant picture number 1 through 7, not window number. So there are 3 windows on my sun porch that are single glaze that have really deteriorated. And this year I had to put temporary caulk around it so the rain wouldn't come in, and put plastic over the windows because it was going to really deteriorate badly. And then the other 2 windows are windows that quite a number of years ago we had repaired through we had the double pane glass put in through this program. but there is splitting on the rails, and it's really hard to open and close the windows, and the rails are getting worse, splitting worse. So we'd like to have those fixed. The bid that we're going with is Jeffrey Franz. I was really impressed with him, and I think he's been doing this kind of work and window restoration for a really long time. That's all I really have.
Okay, and the bid that you selected, it looks like was 750 for the repair itself, and then an additional 700 for the.
I think it was between 630 and 690 for the repair. His initial bid was 630 all together. And then I noticed recently when I was doing these pictures that another window doesn't close evenly. And that's why I sent the last two pictures, picture 6 and 7, to show that the window isn't seated properly and needs a little more work. So I figured it would cost, I don't know, $60 to $100 more. I haven't gotten Jeffrey to come out again because it's a long trip for him. But I figured if he had to do that, it would be an additional charge. And then to paint the windows, he wanted $100 per window, which I think is too much money, but I understand why he needs it, because he'd have to make trips back and forth. So I don't think I'm going to have him paint the windows, but I will have them primed by him and ready for painting. And I'm sure that'll add a little bit more. I just don't know how much. It certainly won't add the $500 that he quoted me for fully painting all 5 windows. So I think 750 is probably about right. I think it might be a little bit more if I don't know in total cost. Maybe 8 or 850. I'm just guessing. So the grant would be for half of that.
Okay. And Kelly, we can award the grant for up to that amount, and then whatever the final costs come in, that'll be okay.
Yeah, typically the grant, we limited at $1,000. So, but it sounded like her absolute maximum project cost would be about $1,500 if all of them were painted fully. So that's why the staff recommendation is to award up to $750, which is 50% of the total cost. But the board could, choose to put a different upper limit on it.
I appreciate your having the flexibility of letting me see what it's going to cost within reason.
That's pretty good. Do any of the other board members have any questions for the applicant or comments?
I'll jump in and just say that I appreciate what she's doing to save the house and the windows, and I think it's appropriate, and I know what it takes to keep old windows working, and it's not simple. And though I wish it was a little bit less so that we could have more opportunity for other people, but what she's doing is important. I concur.
I don't have any questions.
Yeah, I think I'm good. I don't have any questions.
Same.
Okay, I guess in that case would entertain a motion.
Move to approve as proposed.
I'll second that.
Board member Stobie,
Aye.
board member Cook,
Aye.
board member Edgar,
Aye.
board member Ferry,
Aye.
and Chair Blythe.
Aye. All right, congratulations. Hope the project goes well for you.
Okay, thank you very much. And so this has to be done by June 30th?
That's correct. The end of the fiscal year is June 30th, so we need to have the money spent by then. So I'll follow up with you on what we need the documentation that we'll need to get you reimbursed.
Great. Thank you very much. Have a great night.
Thanks, Vicky. All right. Then we'll move into the public hearing portion of the agenda for this evening. One public hearing on land use applications are scheduled tonight. Our role is to conduct the public hearing and to make decisions about the matter before us. In making those decisions, we must apply the applicable codes and laws and cannot vary from or change those laws or codes. Members of the Historic Review Board are to be unbiased. Before the start of the hearing, I will ask the Historic Review Boarders whether they have any potential conflicts such as family, financial, or business relationships with any of the applicants or with regards to the land in question. I will also ask whether any of the Historic Review Board members have discussed the application in question with any of the parties or have independent knowledge of relevant facts such as from a visit to the site in question. Any member of the audience may question any Historic Review Board member about their disclosures. A staff report has been prepared for each application and has been made available to the public 7 days before the first public hearing. The staff report identifies the approval criteria that apply to each applicant's proposal. Staff has analyzed the criteria which are contained in the staff report. The quasi-judicial hearing procedure that the Historic Review Board will follow is set out in state law and the Oregon City Municipal Code. The hearing procedure steps are shown on the Historic Review Board website. Public testimony will be called on in the order it was requested in advance of the meeting. If you have not emailed city staff at planning@orcity.org to request to speak and would like to testify, please raise your virtual or physical hand when I ask if there are others in the audience who would like to participate. For the public record, please begin all testimony stating your name and city of residence. If you would like to receive a copy of the notice of decision, please state your mailing address or email address. Testimony and evidence should be directed toward the applicable approval criteria. If you believe other criteria apply in addition to those addressed in the staff report, identify and discuss those criteria and explain how and why you believe they apply to the application under consideration. Any person may submit written material while the public record is open on each application. Any written materials received by the city staff during the time period in which the record is open will be placed in the record. Written materials submitted during the public hearing must be presented to the city staff in order to become part of the record. If a person intends for PowerPoint presentations, reports, pictures, or other exhibits used in their oral testimony to be placed in the record, copies must be submitted to the city staff while the record is open. If they are not given to staff, they will not be included in the record. Any person wishing a continuance to present additional evidence and testimony or to keep the record open to respond to new evidence must make that request before the public testimony portion of the hearing is closed. If the Historic Review Board makes a decision with which you disagree, any issue that you may wish to appeal must have been raised on the record for the consideration of the City Commission or the Land Use Board of Appeals or both. Without raising the issue on the record with sufficient detail and accompanied by statements or evidence that the city and all parties can respond to the issue will not be deemed appealable to the City Commission or State Land Use Board of Appeals. In addition, the failure of an applicant to raise constitutional or other issues relating to proposed conditions of approval with sufficient detail to allow the local government or its designee to respond to the issue precludes an action for damages in circuit court. All right, now we will open the record for Oregon City file number GLUA 21-00001, HR 21-00001 through 21-00005. The application for historic review for Kenema cottages in the Kenema National Register Historic District. I'll now ask each Historic Review Board member if they have had any ex parte contacts, conflicts of interest, bias, or any other statements to declare. Board members?
No.
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 I am recusing myself from this hearing again and will be testifying.
Okay, thank you, Paul. And have the board members visited the site?
Yes.
Yeah, yes.
Yes.
Okay, and I guess we have something new added to the script for this week. If you visited, and I guess I've visited the site as well, and I do not have any ex parte contacts or conflicts of interest. I guess it's if you have visited the site, I guess we have to declare if we perceived anything unique, I guess. Is that's new in here, Kelly?
I was given a new template that the planning commission uses, so I don't know why that, I'm not aware of why that was added. Maybe Carrie could speak to that.
So the reason it was added was to sort of jog decision makers' reflection about what they saw when they were there on the site visit, and if there's anything about it that about the site visit that made you think anything one way or the other about the application. Like you walked around house 3 and it occurred to you how much taller than it was than you thought it would be. And these need to be sort of specific facts, not sort of generally I walked around and I saw the houses. I mean, that is why you would do a site visit, and that's why it would be appropriate. But if there was something specific that struck you, you need to disclose that fact so that the parties in the proceeding have an opportunity to question you about that fact. I didn't realize how reflective skylights were. Whatever, if there's a particular fact that comes to you as part of a site visit, you need to disclose that, and that's why it was added to the script.
All right, well, in that case, I guess I did visit the site, but I just observed the site to be in the condition consistent with the staff report from last meeting.
Yeah, I guess I would agree. I mean, I visited the site, but it everything was, yeah, consistent with what I had seen before and also the staff report.
I visited the site, but I haven't been back since landscaping went in. I know that was another public comment, so I didn't get a chance to see that.
And I also visited the site, but did not see anything outside or inconsistent of or with the staff report.
Okay. And then in that case, does anyone in the audience wish to question any of the historic review board members about these disclosures? Okay. We'll now commence with the staff report.
Thank you. So we have a lot of new information that we included in the agenda this time as a response to the continuance request and the desire for more kind of a line-by-line comparison of what was approved by the Historic Review Board and what has been built on site. Staff has worked with the applicant to provide side-by-side comparison images of each building facade, of all four sides of all 5 houses, along with identification of differences of the site work, including retaining walls, parking, and landscaping. Landscaping was not included actually in that list, and so I have some information to add about landscaping. But I wanted to kind of explain how that table works And so I'm going to share my screen. See if we can make this a little bit bigger. Okay. So within the table, I have in the first column the description of what has changed. And then in the second column, the reason that the applicant identified for why that change was made. And we have a column for any relevant design guidelines. And then a staff recommendation. And the staff recommendation is going to be one of five things. And those are in the yellow box at the top. So the first option, for staff recommendation is to accept the change as something that is consistent with the approved plans. So these are things that the HRB asked for in 2017 and the applicant did. So that first line, removal of house number 2, that one was required by the Historic Review Board. And so staff recommendation is to accept the change as consistent with the approved plans. Second option is to accept the change as consistent with the design guidelines. So this would be something that the HRB did not necessarily require, but the applicant did change, and staff has reviewed that change against the design guidelines and recommends and finds that it meets the guidelines and recommends the HRB approve that. The third option is to accept the change with the mitigation that has been proposed, either by the applicant or by staff. So these are changes that, don't necessarily meet the design guidelines, but can be found to meet them with mitigation. Option 4 is to accept the change with additional mitigation. So if I have not identified appropriate mitigation in my recommendation, then maybe the HRB could figure out something else that would be acceptable. And then the fifth option is to reject the change and require, something completely different. And so I know that the board is going to, or I think that the board is probably going to be walking through this table together during deliberations. So I'm not going to walk through it line by line. But really for each one of these in these lists, for each one of these changes, the board can kind of, hopefully use this, use one of the 5 options and figure out what the board would like to do for each of these. What I will talk more about is the items that I've identified to be requiring some mitigation in order to approve. And that includes this third item, the height, location and height of the retaining walls. The retaining wall has been adjusted. The city code the retaining wall has been moved. It is 5 feet in height. The HRB condition was to limit that to 3.5 feet. So staff's recommendation is to accept that change. The design guidelines do not specifically prohibit the retaining wall height being 5 feet. And overall, the change in the site work and the retaining walls actually results in less overall grading on site. So that has kind of been approved or improved. And then, as a result, one of these walls is a little taller than maybe what was previously in the plans. I would potentially, suggest that there was a statement at one point by the applicant that there would be vines planted to cover that wall. Landscaping plans don't show that, and so I would suggest perhaps if the board wants to require some sort of plants to cover that, that could be a condition of approval. The next one, if this is scrolling for everyone, line 4 is siding. So all 5 homes have textured fiber cement siding rather than wood. Wood was proposed originally and it was approved. The design guidelines do not specifically prohibit textured fiber cement siding. They call for the appearance of wood siding. Staff recommends conditions of approval to add landscaping to further screen the homes from the view of the right-of-way. Apologies for the typos in there as I'm reading it. I'm realizing there are some typos, but I can also share some images of the siding. I know we've seen these, so actually I'm going to just have those available if there's a question or if the board wants to talk about this further. The last one I want to highlight here is line 5 regarding windows. Staff's recommendation here is to add some trim along the outside to create a better depth and shadow line to meet the design guideline. The historic design guidelines do not specifically prohibit these type of windows. So it's kind of up to the board to make an interpretation of whether these windows can be appropriate here. The additional landscaping that is suggested in the conditions of approval would also help to mitigate for the appearance of the windows. Alternatively, the applicant could just replace the street facing windows with windows that better meet the design guideline. I do have some photos and comparisons that I can share with you if you'd like to see those on the screen at all as well. I will say, I do want to go back and highlight a couple of things. And so I'm going to stop sharing this document and start sharing another one. Okay. Oh, and starts from the beginning, of course. You know, because the design guidelines are just that, they're guidelines and they're not mandatory specific criteria that you can point at and say yes or no. You know, it is such a gray area. Really, I think it's helpful to think about the big picture and the overall appropriateness and compatibility of the project. And to that end, I think these excerpts from our code, chapter 1740, are helpful. That new construction should complement, educate, accentuate historic resources. And you know, I like this comprehensive plan line because it acknowledges that there are new development projects that are reshaping our historic districts and our urban environment. And so I think it's helpful to kind of think about that in the big picture and to look at the site as a whole. I know you're going to go through that table line by line and talk about each facade. But again, when we're looking at the overall district and the overall plan, you know, the characteristics here that we want to protect in Kenema are the narrow streets, the informal driveways, basalt walls and channels, the development pattern of irregular home placement, landscape of dense natural vegetation, and of course the historic homes in the district themselves. And this development is unique in Kenema among everything that has been proposed over the last several years, in that these homes are very modestly sized. They are 1.5-story vernacular designs. They have small footprints, limited massing. There is regular house placement and arrangement to go with the character of the district. And there's landscape preservation as well as new landscaping. And so I think kind of all that put together can be looked at holistically as generally compatible with the district. And so, you know, of course, there are lots of details that you're going to get into. But I do want to, sorry, before I get into landscaping, I want to make sure that I mentioned this was in writing in the staff report, but I don't think we talked about it at all last hearing. Most of the homes in Kenema that we've seen built recently, the new construction, have been, you know, great, more than 2,000 square feet. Some are getting closer to 3,000 square foot homes. When we're dealing with homes of that mass, those are mostly, I would say they're all larger than the average historic home in the district. So your average historic home in the district is probably less than 2,000 square feet. And so these new construction homes are larger, they stick out more. And so the board and staff have been, I think it's reasonable to be stricter with the design guidelines and require more high quality materials to kind of mitigate for the size of those homes. So in comparison, the homes here are all less than 1,000 square feet. And so I think that the board it's reasonable to treat them a little bit differently for that reason. So maybe the same standards that you would hold a large home to are not what you would hold a cottage home to. So, you know, I know we've talked a lot about precedents. And I think that there are findings in the staff report to support a decision to allow some of these materials if the board wishes to do that. And I don't think that you would need to worry necessarily about setting a precedent for future development that would then be allowed to use any type of window or this type of siding again. So I don't think that's something that you need to really worry about here. And then I'm going to talk about landscaping since we got some public comments about that. So the original application included this statement that once construction is completed, the site will be replanted with a dense mix of shrubs, trees, grasses, and flowers native to the region. That was really all we had previously to go on. We didn't have a detailed landscaping plan from the applicant back in 2017. So the design guidelines also talk about native species. They do not require that every site only have native species on it ever. And so the way we have operated in the past is to require kind of naturalistic landscaping that includes a mix of native and ornamental non-native species. What we haven't allowed in Kenema is, you know, bare, like large flat lawns, like row of arborvitae, for example. You know, those are the types of things that I think the design guidelines wouldn't allow, and that we've, you know, advised people not to install. So saying all of that, there are the landscaping, some of the landscaping has gone in. I don't think that it's finished, or I think I know that it's not finished. And so we haven't done a final inspection on the landscaping. So when, no matter what happens tonight, when all the landscaping goes in, the staff would go out and do the landscaping inspection and make sure that it meets the conditions of approval for the site plan and design review process that was reviewed by staff. And so there are very specific landscaping requirements that were approved at a staff level for site plan design review standards. And so we would perform the inspection against that plan and make sure that the landscaping meets it. And we haven't done that yet. So there's still like a lot of unknowns. There might be a lot more plants that would be planted as a result. But I will say that what is on site includes native and non-native species. And we had a public comment come in about a desire for more native species, especially due to the fact that there's a wetland on the site. The applicant does, within the wetland, there are a handful of native trees that are proposed that haven't gone in yet. And then there's seed mix to replace, kind of put on the ground to kind of replace all of the invasive blackberry that the applicant removed from the wetland area. And that hasn't been applied yet. We looked at the actual species within the seed mix and found that some of those seeds are not native. So I'm recommending an additional condition of approval to require that anything within the wetland boundary be only a native plant found on the Oregon City's native plant list, and apply that condition to areas within 50 feet of the wetland as well. And so I have that I'm going to go forward to show you that exact text here. And these are the same slides that we looked at last time. So if you want me to go back, if you have questions, I can. But the recommended conditions of approval from last hearing are here. I've added an additional sentence to 1 and 2 saying that all additional landscaping shall be native species from the city's native plant list. And then my new recommended conditions are to use native plant seed mixes only within the wetland area and within 50 feet of the wetland boundary. And that non-native species that have already been planted that are within 50 feet of the wetland shall be moved to other areas of the site. And then that 5th one is an optional for HRB to discuss for the vines on the retaining wall. So I'm going to stop there. I'm sure you'll have lots of questions and we'll have lots of discussion. And so I guess what I would suggest before you go into everything else is that when you get to deliberations, you might want to consider, just know that you can, I guess not consider, but just know that you can open the record at any time in deliberations if you have questions of the applicant or questions of staff, kind of as you go through that list. And so I will just end with that and let you ask questions.
All right, thanks, Kelly. Any board members have questions for Kelly at the moment? Okay, before we move into public testimony, Carrie, would you want to give a summary of your memorandum?
Sure, I'm happy to. Very quickly. I went back through the Kanema Cottages Luba decision, And what Luba said is whether or not a guideline is a mandatory approval criterion is a fact by fact determination based on the language of the guideline itself. And so that was sort of the holding that Luba identified. And then Luba went through a number of the guidelines that were raised in that appeal and explained why some of them were approval criterion and some of them were guidance that could be balanced and evaluated independently. And it's important to remember that there's a difference between a mandatory approval criterion that's clear and objective and one that requires discretion, right? Both of those are mandatory, but one allows discretion and one is clear and objective. So retaining wall at 3.5 feet would be clear and objective. Minimizing the height of a retaining wall would be discretionary. Those are both approval criterion, but one allows greater discretion. And so what Luba said was, unless the language flat prohibits something, like the use of glass block, for example, is something that is prohibited in the guidelines, then there may be more discretion depending on the language of the guideline. And so that is the framework that Luba set. So it is not that every statement in the guidelines is a mandatory approval criterion, but rather it depends on the language of the standard itself. And then in some cases, those standards are discretionary, so allow the board some interpretive authority to make independent decisions. So I'm happy to talk about any guideline specifically that you all have concerns about, but that's the framework that I set out in my memo.
Okay, thanks, Carrie. Any board members have questions for Carrie? All right, in that case, we'll move to public testimony. So we'll have up to 15 minutes for the applicant, up to 5 minutes for representatives of recognized neighborhood associations, government agencies, or other incorporated public interest organizations, up to 3 minutes for individuals, and then up to 5 minutes for the applicant's rebuttal. So on that note, we'll go ahead and invite Mr. Staggs on behalf of the applicant.
Can you guys hear me okay?
We can. Please state your name and city of residence, please.
My name's Chris Staggs. I live in Oregon City. Kelly, can you share your screen and start with, is there a way that you and I can coordinate with you sharing your screen, starting with the page 1 of my package?
Yes, let me bring that up.
And I'll just say next for next page. And I'm going to leave my video off because my connection is a little dodgy tonight, and it's probably better if we just leave my video off at the moment. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go as quickly as possible and as thoroughly as possible to describe the changes that we made. And what I want to do is start first with an emphasis that I think it's important for the board to appreciate, especially considering that everyone on the board is new and was not, except for Mr. Blythe, was not present at the meeting where this project was approved. But one really important thing that I think is important to understand, appreciate, is that when we were given the approval for that application, the changes that were made between that time, the time we really submitted for permits, a lot of other events took place and a lot of evolution of the project took place to meet the city guidelines for the geological hazard. Went through a LUBA appeal, and there was a lot of time that went by between those between the event of when it was approved and when we actually were permitted, started building. So what I'm hoping to do is very as precisely as possible describe to you what's different between what was approved and what was built and why it's different. I know Kelly together a really good description of that in writing and in her packages, and hopefully tonight we can come to a conclusion. So on this first page, this is about site planning. So we talked about this time, it's important to understand that house number 2 was removed, and the parking lot behind house number 1, the parking area behind house number 1 was no longer necessary. And we removed it so that we reduced the amount of grading and impact to the site in terms of grading and topography. One of those parking spaces moved over to the other side off of Miller Street. So now between number 1 and 2, the site plan on the right, we have landscaping, walkways, public area for the cottages, for people to have a barbecue outside and gardens and enjoy the sun. And I think it's also really important for everyone to recognize that the wetland was a very important part of the project, in the sense that we preserved the wetland and all are avoiding the wetland. So we're kind of threading a needle here. It's like a Swiss watch. You've got property lines, you've got the wetland, and I think in the end, it ended up being a development that really makes sense in Kenema in terms of the character, the scale, the density, and everything, like Kelly mentioned earlier. Okay, Kelly, next slide, please. These two drawings show the site section on the top is the proposed house number 2 and the parking area behind house number 2. And then the drawing on the bottom shows what's built today. And I think it's important to see the relationship, because the impact to the site and the impact to the neighborhood is much, much less with what we're building today in terms of topographic impact and visual impact in the neighborhood. Okay, next. And then these are 2 photographs taken back behind house number 1 and house number 2, showing the landscaping and public sidewalk areas and what the scale and character of that back space is going to look like. It's hard without the landscaping in there, but originally the original house number 2 was removed because of the conditions of approval. And then again, the parking area was removed behind house number 1. And one space was moved over to Miller Street. And we believe that the project is more compatible with the historic district because of these changes. Most of all the changes we made from the original approval that we have out there today, those changes were largely made to be more in compliance and more in character with historic district. Okay, next. This slide, I wanted to point out a couple of really important things relating to windows and a broader comment about these two quotes on the left are both taken out of the historic guidelines, specifically regarding the vernacular style in the historic districts of Oregon City. And the first one, just to emphasize, it says, quote, lacks rigid system of exterior detailing that makes it a clearly definable architectural style, allows design flexibility and is inherently varied. And I think if you look at these photographs of all these historic homes in Kenema, for example, in the upper right, this house is right next to house number 1. You see that the house in the window in the middle of that facade is 2 windows grouped together, very similar to the ones that we have on our actions, multiple groupings. And that emphasizes or illustrates this idea about flexibility and variation. The historic guidelines, and then if you look at the windows in the house, not the top photograph, but the next one down, there on the upper level, you have the typical you have the typical 1 to 2 portion where you have a square over a square. But there's nothing in the guidelines that say you have to do that on every single window, or that every single window has to be 1 window like that in every single facade. So the guides provide that flexibility and that variation, and it's stated right in the guidelines. And I think that's an important thing to to keep in mind. And then the second quote, can combine features from other architecture during the historic period, simpler designs than McLaughlin. And that's one thing about Kenema that is important to keep in mind, is that the Kenema district has a lot of variation. It's a little quirky. You have different things happening around the neighborhood. And that's the character of Kenema is about that. It's not about a rigid system of windows all being 2/1 or all being a certain dimension or all being detailed exactly the same. Kenema is about having that kind of flexibility and variation, because the people that originally built there, they were building in a kind of a quirky hillside, riverfront neighborhood where they had to make do with what they had. And I think that flexibility is important to keep in mind. Okay, next slide, please. This slide specifically illustrates the comparison of our original historic review board window configuration on several of the windows and then what we have built. And additionally, they're the same. So you have the typical 2:1 proportion. You have a division between the 2 windows. The only difference is that the window that we've built today, the 2 windows are grouped together as a single unit in the factory. So that comes out as 1 single unit, which makes the construction easier, and it makes the windows less costly and therefore more affordable. And but the proportions are the same, the divisions are the same. I think what maybe throws people off a little bit is that the color of the frames are a darker color. But if you go back to that previous slide, if you could, Kelly, sorry, the previous slide with the house next door, the upper right hand, yeah, it's actually back the other direction. Yeah, right there. So if you look at that house in the window or in the middle on the top photograph, all the frames in that window are painted black, just like the one house. So when you're standing back and looking at it from the street or from a distance, it doesn't have that classic 1 to 2 proportion like you see in the photograph below it. And it's partially because the windows are painted black. The window sashes and frames are painted black rather than white. But that's something that you see in many places around Kenema. So I think that's an important distinction to make with regard to windows. Okay, next. And then we've gone facade by facade on every single house and identified the changes. You have the conditions of approval, you have the change approval, and then the reason for the change and the compatibility. The suggested compatibility and a proposed mitigation. I don't have time to go through every single house. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit what I think are the highlights. On house number 1, the big difference with the window, the big difference here is that the stairs are now oriented in another direction. So instead of a frontal entrance up to the front porch of house number 1, now it's the stairs are going towards the west. So what that did, that allowed us to bring the topography up, to make the topography much more in its as it originally was there before. So instead of having a wall facing the street, now we have this landscaping and topography facing the street, which is more in with the which is more in character with Kenema. And then the windows, rather than being separately grouped, separate windows, we've grouped them together, but we still have the same number of windows. We of 3 rather than 3 groupings of 2. So we think that that is compatible with the historic guidelines. And as you'll see throughout the whole situations where we believe that we were actually making the homes more in keeping with the historic character of Kenema, rather than going the other direction of not being as compatible with the historic character of Kenema. Okay, next. And actually, I think it probably makes sense, Kelly, just to go right to house number house 4, if you don't mind. Given the time limitation. Okay. So in the approval criteria, in the conditions of approval, and at that last HRB meeting when we were having our final discussions about what was going to be approved and what was not going to be approved, I think this slide illustrates a very important point. If you look at the drawing on the left, was our original proposed elevation for this house number 4, facing the wetland area, and you can see it's a much more modern facade. And across the board in all the homes, we have gone to a less modern design. So we do not have any vertical siding on any of the homes. They're all whole siding. We do not have any large areas of glass that don't have divisions in them. So on the lower level of house number 4, there are those are all French doors. They're not sliding doors. Everything is a French door. So that meets the conditions of approval. I think that's an important thing for the board to keep in mind, is that we have generally gone in the direction of more compatible and less modern across the board on all the homes. Last, go to the next slide, Kelly. I believe that's the one. Okay, so this one I think is another important to make regarding the skylights. And I'm gonna conclude my comments with these last comments here, and that is regarding the skylights and the siding is all horizontal, so it's all very much in keeping with the historic district in Kenema. We did use hardy fiber siding rather than actual wood, which was mostly a decision based on cost. When originally we had proposed 7 homes on the property, which we believe were appropriate for Kenema and the density. The Historic Review Board didn't agree with it, and so we built 5 instead. So when we went down to 5 homes, there's a dramatic impact on the financial feasibility of a project in that house. So there were some cost-cutting measures that we took. Rather than walking away from the project and not building it, we still believe that we had a good project and we wanted to build it. But there were cost-cutting measures that we had to take on. And one of those cost-cutting measures is the reduction of some window sizes and doing a few less windows. But I can assure you, from my perspective as an architect, as a builder, and someone who cares about the kind of the bigger picture of a neighborhood and the city in general, and wanting to make places that people love to live in and people want to have a great experience in, I am the first person that I'm loath to reduce natural light in a home. But there are some places where we did make the windows smaller, and we did remove some skylights. We removed many of the skylights, but with some of them because we wanted to have as much natural light as possible. And you can see in the image on the left here with the skylights, with the shadow line, those were less, they weren't, in my opinion, the original skylights were not, they didn't have that, they didn't have the slimness and they were a little bit too visible. So if you look at the skylights now across the board in all the homes, they're painted almost the same color as the roof. They're very discreet, and none of them face the right, which meets the original guidelines of Kenema, of the skylights not facing the right of way. So I'm going to end my comments there, and thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Do any of the board members have any questions for the applicant? Okay, real briefly before we move on to other public comments, Chris, could you, in maybe 1 minute, comment on the new proposed condition of approval of the native landscaping within 50 feet of the wetland and the potential vines on the concrete retaining wall?
I'm sorry, what was the question again?
Could you comment on 2 things? One, the new condition of approval or proposed condition of approval of only using native plants within 50 feet of the wetland border. And then number 2, the potential mitigation of putting vines or other, hanging, or I don't know, screening plants on the concrete retaining wall.
Yeah, I'll comment on the second point first. On the retaining wall at the end of the driveway in house number 1 that is 5 feet tall, as well as the wall of porch number 1, which is there at the corner of, it's the northwest corner of porch number 1. What we're planning on doing is planting vines that will open those walls to further obscure the concrete to mitigate on the landscaping. It's important to find that we're not done with the landscaping on the property. The plan with the wetland is to plant that with only native landscaping, and that are landscaping that is typically seen in a wetland per the landscape architecture drawings that we have permitted right now. When the landscaping is all planted, and especially when it's all mature, based on the planning plan that we have, we think that's going to be appropriate with the Kenema Historic District, and will be compatible with the Historic District. In terms of requiring only native landscaping within 50 feet of the that's something that I'd like to have more discussion on. That is not specifically a requirement in Kenema. Native planting, and right now we have a mix of native and some non-native planting, but the majority of the planting is actually
Okay, thanks, Chris. Sorry, cutting out there a little bit, but I think we got it. So we'll move on to other public testimony. So again, we'll have up to 5 minutes for representatives of organizations and up to 3 minutes for individuals. The first commenter on my list is Linda Basinger. State your name and city of residence, please. I see you logged in, Linda, but you're on mute
Yeah.
there.
Linda Basinger.
Go ahead, Linda. Are you still there, Linda?
She's on mute again.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm back.
Yes, we can hear you now.
So it was a beautiful day. I took a nice drive through the project. I appreciated the landscaping that has been done. It does make a huge difference on the way they look. The project sits 28 feet from the road. I couldn't tell if it was flat or not for the siding. And I went all up and down 4th and Ganong. I couldn't tell of anyone what the sidings were, other than when you have the T111 because they're vertical. But you just can't notice the siding from the street as you drive by. And the wall that's 5 feet tall, I think by the time you get a car in there, you're not going to notice it. And the cement wall does fit in with a lots of Kenema. We have lots of rocks and lots of rock walls, and they all have moss. They have things that are grown on them. They're all soft and muted. And when this gets grown, it will not be objectable. You won't even notice it. It will fit right in. It would be very, very covered soon. So those are my comments. It's probably much easier to pass this tonight than it was the other time, because you've had time to read this and everything's been graciously presented. So I urge you to support this, to pass this the way it has been supported by the city, and just get this project finished and gone. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Linda. Any questions for Linda? All right, we'll go to the next public comment, which is Celeste Blythe. Please state your name and city of residence.
Hi, my name is Celeste Blythe. I live in the Kenema district of Oregon City. And I did take some time over the last couple weeks to familiarize myself with the project history and the historic build requirements and guidelines. To me, the biggest issue with this project is precedent. I disagree with Kelly's comments that this would not set a precedent for siding and windows for future builds. Reasoning is when people come to Kenema and submit builds, they look at different homes in the area and they compare their project with the finished structures. It will be used as a point of reference. And over time, the board members will be new and they'll be completely unaware of the history of this particular project. Not only that, but allowing non-compliance only sets a precedent for future builds, that they can build without clear approval or out of compliance and simply ask for forgiveness without enforcement. As I looked through the documents, there's just so much that's changed. It's really overwhelming. I've watched Mr. Staggs in the previous recorded meetings as I was researching, and he really seems committed to following the historic requirements and guidelines. But in the last couple of meetings, that's kind of shifted to talking about why deviations should be acceptable more so than guidelines or ambiguity within guidelines. And I think it's also important to note that this wouldn't be the first time that the Historic Review Board required a builder to correct items such as these. A specific example I can think of is the commercial building in McLaughlin, the one at 415 Center Street, where the builder had to replace the siding because they had textured hardy plank and they were asked to put on the smooth board instead. And they did do that. The siding's an easy comparable example. And I did read through the HRB policies and the guidelines, and I did see that the policy for repair and replacement of siding specifically states that only smooth fiber sense boards are permitted, where the building guidelines do state that sample approval is required for non-wood horizontal, which to my understanding wasn't done. So at this point, it seems impossible to correct all of the items that can be considered ambiguous, but there are definitely items more straightforward, such as windows and siding, that should be corrected. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Celeste. Any questions from the board? Okay, those were the only two names that I had submitted for written comment. Anybody else on the call for comment?
Yeah, I'd like to make a comment. This is Ron Beislein, and I agree with Celeste 1000%. As I sat here and listened to Mr. Skaggs said, we believe. It's not about we, it's about Kenema. And it's about the board that now has to make a decision on something that didn't do what they said they were going to do for the city of Kenema. And that is very disheartening that there's been 5 homes built, or at least got approval to build in the last 6 years here. And they all complied with the requirements of the code. Mr. Skaggs did what he wanted to do. The windows are definitely showing the picture. They have in-depth 1.5 inches, and those windows are not like the same windows. And it doesn't matter what it costs to build a home. Everybody had to pay that price. Why does he get to be different? Another thing too is I'm concerned about is the precedent it sets, because with that precedent, there's no code requirement saying what side of siding you should do or what kind of windows you have or how big a house you have. There's nowhere in the code that specifies that. The people that have built the house in the last 5 years have went to the code, they went to the city, and they made changes and asked to make changes. They didn't just build something and say, okay, I'm done. Let me have my occupancy permits the way I built my home, which wasn't to the code. So very disappointed in this. And I think that we should follow the code, make changes to homes like the other people have done and cost them the money for it because it's their homes. And then we can move on, because you're right, it is going to set a precedent. And I think maybe even set a legal precedent. So I just want you to consider that. And I think we also can ask for continuance against this meeting, because I like to bring this up for the Kenema Neighborhood Association meeting in April. Because I believe everybody in Kenema has a right to say what they think about this. going away from the code, and the people especially that have built the homes in the last 5 years, and people are going to build the homes in the future. Thank you.
I'm Paul Edgar, and I've been representing this stuff, and I would like to make my comment as a Friends of Kenema.
1 second. Any questions for Ron first? Okay, go ahead, Paul.
Thank you. First of all, I believe there's been a lot of errors in judgment that have been made here in this whole process, but one of the most important ones was that when the HRB and the ruled, they were to come back and get approval. And in no time on these major issues like siding and windows, was there ever a request for HRB approval or done. It's like, I don't need to do this. So the precedence that was already stated about siding, I think it's very important that that it's supposed to be smooth. And we made that ruling before on the Center Street commercial building. I don't see any reason why it should not happen again. The windows are not in compliance. They are a double pane, one sheet of glass with a small mullion across the middle of them on the majority of those which are so-called divided light. The dimensions of them are not in relationship to some of the windows. I did ask Kelly to provide a picture of a window like this on my house, which is an 1880 window from a vernacular house in Kenema as a representation of what windows do look like. And if I was to try to take one of these windows that's on these cottage homes and put it on an 1880 house, it would be totally incompatible. That means it's detracting, and it detracts. So Kenema has been facing the death of 1,000 cuts. And somewhere along the line, we have to draw the line and stop all of these cuts that are destroying Kenema from its credibility, its integrity. The siding is one issue, and that's across the board. Skylights are visible, and our codes say they should not be visible. And I remember going back and I sent a copy of an email back in where I stated, I showed it to the pictures and the skylights on house number 4 were just there, and house 5. And so as I start looking through them, those skylights should not be there. And any way that you could say that they're acceptable, there's no way that they could be acceptable. On a point 7, I've got here, the grading. Somewhere along the line, we blew it because they graded this, exceeded anything of 1740 codes. And this is an example of just, wow, anything goes. But so the wall, 5 feet, 3.5 feet. Yes, one says 3.5 feet. That's what our code, what our conditions of approval called for. And why would somebody build one 5 feet if you know the conditions of approval, unless you don't care? Okay, the property line wall with house number 1, with the steel and concrete, they want to cover that. That wall is moving. They shoved it back. It had moved already close to 18 inches, and then with a grader shoved it back and put rocks into there. But that wall, holding on, adhering anything to that wall over a period of time is going to be almost impossible. And something should be done to make sure that they do something to correct this. 6 windows on the front of house number 1. We have historically never allowed that on any type of historic structure. And where we put 2 in clusters on both sides, yes, but 6, again, is a detracting, and it's almost the same mindset as how detracting the door side windows are on houses 4 and 5. They should not have ever been allowed. They detract, and that's part of degrading the integrity of historic Kenema. The divided lights and of the windows themselves, are proportionally, they swing more to the square rather than to the rectangular. And so as you start to move these things, I sent in dimensions showing what really a historic window looks like and what the sizes are. And we're not that close. The divided lights should not happen. The placements of the windows, there's no balance to the placements of the windows, and no one really seems to think that that's a factor. But again, it's a degrading of the integrity of the district. House number 2, siding is not right. Windows are not right. I know that the cutaway of the area, we said don't cut the roof away, but the cutaway, and it's in a sense, it's again a subjective view of saying, how do I get around word usage? Windows and skylights, even the skylights on house number 2 are visible.
All right, Paul, I think you're about at your 5 minutes there. Wrap it up.
Thank you.
Okay. Oh, by the way, can I make one final remark?
No.
Okay.
No.
You got 10 seconds, Paul.
They killed the trees along the big Douglas fir trees or whatever the trees there by trenching and doing things without permits, without as required in the conditions of approval.
All right, thank you, Paul. Any questions for Paul? Okay, and I see a chat question from Chris, and I'll just mention that Paul got 5 minutes because he was representing an incorporated nonprofit organization. All right, on that note, we'll go back to Mr. Staggs. You have up to 5 minutes for any rebuttal.
Okay, can everyone hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. I think it's really important and to point out that both Paul Edgar and Ron Bisline were both very strong opponents from day one. They both were publicly in meetings at the Kenema Neighborhood Association and in public meetings. Both of them were strong opponents. For the most part, the neighborhood was very supportive of the project. I don't have an exact precise number, but I would put it at like 95 to 99% support. But both Paul Edgar and Ron Bisline were both very strong opponents and did not want to see this project happen. Additionally, Paul Edgar is constantly describing things that are not true, like the wall on the west property line moving 18 inches. He's just completely wrong. And for him to say that the windows in house number 1 are out of balance, it's perfectly symmetrical. How can that be called out of balance? You know, I'm an architect. I know what balance looks like. I'm not saying that I'm the architect in the world, but I'm an architect and I know what balance means. And Paul Edgar is constantly in all these public hearings, basically saying things that are not true about the wetland, about walls, about that. He has written books. He has written hundreds of pages of false descriptions of the project over the past 3 years. I think it's important for the HRBers that are new to the HRB to understand and know that. Thank you.
I'd like to make a comment on that about myself, Grant. That's his
I
project.
think we've already moved on from that. I appreciate it, but I think we're going to try to hold to the process here, Ron.
Okay, I was told that, I asked Kelly the other day, can I make a rebuttal after Mr. Skaggs makes a rebuttal? And she said I could. So is that not correct?
No. You, Mr. Bisline, have requested a continuance. And so I think that at this point, if we're done with folks who have signed up to testify, we need to make a decision about that continuance. And should the HRB decide to grant the continuance, you may have another opportunity to testify orally or in writing, but we're going to make a decision about that, please, before you testify any further.
Okay, thank you, Carrie.
Okay, on those comments for the rest of the board, any thoughts, opinions on considering the request for continuance?
So if I may, I just want to frame the issue a little bit for HRB. So the request was made for a continuance in order to speak with the neighborhood association. That is not a reason that is recognized in the law as requiring a continuance. So it is within the discretion of the HRB to decide if you want to continue this meeting to another date. I'm assuming it would be the last or second to last Tuesday, second to last Tuesday of April. Kelly needs to weigh in whether or not we can accommodate an appeal period and proceeding before the city commission with that continued date. And then assuming that the schedule will accommodate it, then you all have the discretion to decide whether or not you want to continue or close the record and make a decision tonight.
Okay, thank you, Carrie. Any comments from the other board members? I guess I personally, although it might be nice to, give the opportunity for the neighborhood association to hear this, this project has been around for several years now and has been in front of the HRB for public comment, both in the original application and, 2 meetings this year for these revised conditions. So my personal opinion is that I don't think that we would get additional information that would help us make a better decision by granting the continuance.
I would agree with you, Grant. I don't see any reason to approve the continuance just for the neighborhood association. They've had a couple of years to review this as well, so.
I agree as well. I don't think there's any new information that might come to light.
Yeah, I tend to agree with everyone else. I don't.
Okay, it seems like we're all in alignment then. So at this point, unless there are any other public comments, I think we got them all. We will close the record for public comment and move into deliberations.
I thought Carrie said I could say something. Is that true, Carrie, or not? Is it done?
No, the applicant bears the burden of proof, so the applicant gets the last word. And that was Mr. Staggs, and he has testified, and the HRB has decided that they are going to close the record now and deliberate. So you're not going to get another opportunity to testify before the HRB.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so my suggestion would be that we walk through the spreadsheet that Kelly's prepared item by item. I suspect that some of the items are, either not material or non-controversial, and we'll be able to just kind of check them off that we're either okay with the change as it is or the, proposed mitigation that staff has recommended. And then any of the items that are maybe more controversial or need some further discussion, then we can go through those one by one, depending on all of your opinions. We can either kind of, note any of those that we want to talk about in more depth and then circle back to them at the end, or we can just kind of go through them in order. Any opinions on how you want to do that?
I would say go through one by one and not circle back. Just
Okay.
tread through it.
Agreed.
Yeah, I think one by one would help me compartmentalize and see it a little better too than tracking back.
All right. Well, then let's get down to brass tacks, or however the saying is, I guess. So, so I've got the spreadsheet in front of me. I don't know if Kelly, if you want to bring it up on your screen as well again, or. So there are 39 items on here, and we can just start with number 1. So number 1 was removal of house number 2, which was consistent with one of the conditions of approval. So I don't see any issues with that item there. Any, I guess, other comments or objections on that one?
No.
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 Okay, so we'll accept that item. So I'm just going to make notes as we go through, and I'm only going to, make a note if it is different than the staff recommendation that's in the spreadsheet. Okay, number 2, changes to parking and walkway layout. The reason identified was that the parking needs changed with removal of house number 2. Staff's recommendation is to accept the change. It's consistent with approved plans. Any comments on that item? I guess I will say that this one, in my mind, it is linked in a way to number 3, which is the retaining walls. And so I did go back and, by having the parking is not necessary, but by having the wall further back and like a more gradual slope upward, in my mind, the intent was that none of the retaining walls exceeded 3.5 feet that way. And there was discussion in the meeting that if there was a need to do any walls greater than 3.5 feet, that they would be split into terraced walls with at least 2 feet in between them. So I do, I guess I do find, having that higher wall closer to the street and closer to the back of the home kind of disruptive. Any, I don't know.
Now so are we going to item? No, we're on item 3.
Well,
You're
item
just saying that
2.
they're linked to one another.
Yeah, in my mind anyway, yeah.
I mean, I tend to agree with you. I like maybe the idea of, if we could require, I think the last time, if I heard correctly, you talked about putting a kind of like a rock facade on it and like planting some vines, if that's an acceptable mitigation for that. I mean, I think I could be okay with that. As long as it would be a condition that he would have to meet. Without, I don't know if it would be, I wouldn't maybe trust it to happen, but if we could make it a condition. That's something I might propose.
Grant, are you suggesting that they terrace it?
Yeah, that, I mean, so this one is one that I, yeah, struggle with probably the most out of all of them, is that ideally it would have been terraced likely, and it's rather than one wall exceeding the 3.5 feet, which was the intent of the condition. I'm unsure whether, that's a pretty substantial impact, I would imagine, based on the way it's constructed right now. So I guess I'm weighing whether, the improvement by making that requirement would be, enough to justify the impact of imposing that condition.
So something that I liked about having the taller wall was that even if it's more visually impactful, supposedly it was less invasive on the grading of the topography, right? So even though we're seeing a taller wall, maybe the plantings could do more to hide that, as opposed to having them go back and actually invasively cut into the side of the hill to create a terraced stepped wall, right?
Yeah, I think
But
that's
wait.
a fair point. Go
So
ahead,
we
Ray.
have two opinions, but either a stepped or a terraced wall. Grant, that's what you're saying, and then the other option is to keep the wall at 5 feet, but impose the vines or the smaller landscaping.
Well, originally when Grant brought up the fact that the walls were only supposed to be 3.5 feet, in the original conditions of approval, it sounded like it had something to do with grading the site, right? It was less.
Right.
So, so if there's actually less grading of the site with this 5-foot wall, then wouldn't that in some ways be a good thing? Or, I'm sorry, I'm new to this, so I'm just trying to find.
No, that's a very good point.
Oh, yeah.
Ray, what's your opinion on the proposed condition on adding the vine or hanging vines that might cover the wall?
I think it could add the appearance to add some density to it, so it's not as impactful, but does blend into the rest of the landscaping. I know it doesn't call for it, but the vines, but I don't know. I'm leaning towards the less grading and adding vines.
And
Okay.
just as maybe as a reminder for me, what was the reason that I'm sure I could go back and look, but if anybody knows off the top of their head, what was the reason that it was built was a 5-foot wall instead of the terracing? Did we ever get a clear answer on that?
I thought it was because the parking area behind house number 1 had changed because of the removal of house number 2. And so they put the walkway in, and therefore they put a driveway for 2 cars to access next to house number 1.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, that answers my question. Thank you.
Okay, so it sounds to me like there's a consensus to leave the wall as is, but add the condition of approval to plant vines or other landscaping to add some screening to the
To
wall.
cover the wall, yeah. So I would say that we accept the change for number 2 because it's consistent with the approved plans, but 3, we're going to impose the or enforce the add the condition that the vines or the espalier will be added to cover the wall.
Okay. Just a point of order here. Kelly, are you taking notes as we go through these, or do you want us to capture those?
Yes, I can take notes, and I think this condition is already
Okay.
typed into the slides that we looked at earlier.
Okay, very good. Okay, so number 4 is the textured fiber cement siding rather than the wood siding that was proposed. Staff's recommendation is to accept the change with conditions of approval to add landscaping to further screen the view of the homes from the right of way. So I guess on this one, I'm a little conflicted as well. Certainly we've allowed fiber cement siding, so that's not too much of an issue in and of itself. But we have been very consistent that we only allow smooth fiber cement siding. I think, ideally here the applicant would have, they proposed wood and we approved wood. I think the changes for cost reasons are reasonable, particularly, given what we've heard about wood construction products during, the COVID year being, up 400% type of thing. But, I would have expected the applicant to come back and, get that approval up front. And, then of course we would have been able to note that smooth siding is required.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Ray, I guess, we did have a similar situation on a project in the McLaughlin district, just, I don't know exactly what month that was, but this last year, in which this came up, and we did require the applicant to remove the textured siding and install smooth siding.
Correct.
So I don't know. I do think that it's difficult to tell from the street. I do worry about the precedent that it sets. I do think that the scale of the houses is probably an issue as far as what's more noticeable in the neighborhood, as far as siding goes. I'm very interested in hearing maybe what Carrie also thinks about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough position. In the quote, one of the things I've highlighted in this packet after I printed out is sample approval is required for non-wood horizontal board siding. And I don't think we, as far as I know, there was no sample provided to approve. you know, it feels a lot like a case of asking forgiveness rather than permission. You know, I mean, it's been a really tough year for everybody, but you know, once, you know, it puts us in a tough spot, and it's really hard to say, hey, you know, in the McLaughlin neighborhood, you know, we ask you to take it down, and we're not going to ask you to take it down now. You know, I could go for a range of options here if anybody has something to propose. You know, everything from take it down to when it needs to be replaced, it has to be replaced with smooth board siding. So I guess those are my thoughts on it.
Ray, do you have a opinion?
I'm torn on this one, Grant. I hear what everyone else is saying, and I agree. At the same time, I take a look at what the relevant design guideline says, and then you factor in McLaughlin. You treat McLaughlin one way and Kenema another. I don't want to set that precedent either. So I'm torn.
You know, it's really rough also to, you know, to ask, you know, that we have this list of things and we're really relying on a lot of landscaping to be done to cover them. You know, when just, you know, providing a sample for approval, we might not be here. And because now we have a hard decision to make, and, you know, maybe that decision is the siding needs to be changed. You know, I don't know. I'm open to options.
Yeah, I mean, Carrie, you mentioned that were a lot of the recommendations are, or so far, you're asking that landscaping be the cover, and you know, landscaping is what one of the items that if you don't take care of it, it goes away, and then what happens if that does happen? And then you're viewing what you hoped that the landscaping would cover. So it's almost like you're using landscaping as a band-aid to fix all of these other issues rather than addressing the actual wound.
Than the actual issue in itself.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is, you know, and it's not just this. We talk about landscaping. I mean, if I had to highlight every time landscaping came up, it's kind of rough, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even if, you know, that siding needs to be replaced 20 years from now, I mean, it's gonna have to, it should probably go back and be corrected. You know, in my mind, it's like, is it gonna be a now or later situation? But it, you know, for continuity's sake, I would like to see it at some point be smooth.
So I guess, do we feel like we have consensus on this item, or I know we said we weren't going to circle back.
Well, maybe this one we need to circle back.
I agree. Let's circle back.
Yeah, let's look at it. We'll come back to it and think of it more as a holistic. Maybe that will help us.
Yeah.
All right. We will come back to number 4. All right, number 5 is the windows not having the depth of a conventional double hung window. Staff's recommendation is to accept the change with condition of approval number 3 to either replace the street facing windows or add thicker trim. And I think that realistically, it's the adding thicker trim would be the item here.
And look, there's landscaping again.
Yeah. I guess,
However, I think the condition of approval number 3, either replacing the windows or adding a thicker trim, I think is the focus here. I don't believe the crutch is going to be landscaping. I think either one of those is obviously it will solve the issue. So I think I'm okay with the to accept the change consistent with the mitigation proposed, which is the condition of approval number 3.
yeah, I think that I concur with you on that, Ray. The windows are maybe not ideal, but they're not low quality either. And they're certainly not, I don't feel they detract from, the neighborhood as a resource. So I'm okay with the proposed condition number 3.
Yeah, I would agree. I would just, when it says either replace the street facing windows or add thicker trim, are we deciding between those two things? Or we're just saying, we're just approving this? Is it up to the?
I read it as an option, either or.
Okay,
That's how I read it.
I'm fine with either one. I just, for clarity's sake, I guess I wanted to. Then I agree with you guys. I would be willing to accept the mitigation change.
Agreed. I think that I don't find the windows that offensive. But I do think the adding the thicker trim would be nice. I do think that one of the things I noticed while looking at the elevations of the houses is that aside from the eave overhang, there's not a lot of depth. So the sides of the house feel very flat. And I think that adding that thicker trim would definitely create more depth within the exterior elevations. And that would be a nice thing.
Good point.
Okay, sounds like have concurrence. We'll go with the staff recommendation to the condition of approval number 3. Item number 6, fascia width on all homes is larger than shown in the HRB approved designs. Staff's recommendation is to accept the change as it's consistent with design guidelines. I'm personally okay with this. I don't have any problem.
Same here.
Yeah, I'm good with this.
Agreed.
Okay. And then number 7 was replacing the vertical siding with horizontal siding, which was a condition of approval. The staff's recommendation is to accept the change as it's within design guidelines, and I'm okay with this one as well.
I'm okay with it.
Same here.
Yeah, me too.
All right, very good. Then we'll move on to number 8, which is moving from the general site items into house number 1. So number 8 is The front porch stair orientation, moving from front facing to side facing. And staff's recommendation is to accept the change as it's within the design guidelines. I think I'm okay with this one as well.
It's
Same.
fine. I'm good.
I don't have any problems with, I think we should accept the change.
Number 9, the exposed foundation area is higher than shown on the plans. At its highest, it's 4 feet 8 inches. The staff's recommendation is to accept the change consistent with proposed mitigation, which is to use landscaping to cover the exposed foundation. This will require partial removal of the walkway to add space for planting shrubs and or vines.
I would be okay with this if we go with the mitigating. I mean, here we're at landscaping, but I could see how landscaping could help with that.
I agree with Carrie. Do we want to be specific? Do you want to add a condition of approval with a specific type of screening?
I think we should be as specific as possible, so that there isn't a lot of questioning or a whole lot of interpretation after this.
Okay.
I would think, shrubs, or if the vines could match whatever was on the retaining wall, maybe. Or even if we put in the condition that maybe he could review different plants with staff. I'm not like a plant person, but is that possible?
You had me fooled, Carrie. I thought you were.
Yeah, I know. I'm a real plant guy.
I don't see a reason why they. I mean, that's what staff is for, is to help guide them through this. So yeah, I don't. Grant, could we could do that, right?
Yeah, I think that's fine. I'm trying to pull up the photo to see about the removal, partial removal of the walkway, what that impact is going to be. Okay.
Which document are you looking at, Grant?
I am looking at the, right now, I guess I'm looking at the plan comparison for Chris Staggs 1 out of the agenda. There's an angled, I guess it was to applicant's inventory of changes to homes in site.
Okay.
There's an angled photo there of the, I think what's the spot that we're talking about.
Apologies, I'm having trouble with my mouse navigating here, but I'm trying to get the site plan up so you can see where this walkway is.
I can, here, I wonder if I can share.
So it'd be right here where my arrow is pointing. I think that's a 3-foot walkway right now, and it would, I'm not sure if it's at the same grade as the future driveway. The driveway hasn't been surfaced yet, so I don't know if there's like a grade change there between the walkway and the driveway. But you could probably just remove, like, even if it's just 6 inches or so of that walkway, and fit some plants in.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's fine. I looked at just straight at it today, and I can't remember the pavers are on the driveway today, but they're not in the photo before. But I can't remember exactly what it looks like. I guess I'm okay with the staff's recommendation as written, which would require partial removal and some plantings or vines there.
Is the photo sharing now
Mhm.
of
Yep.
the house?
Uh-huh.
Okay. So you can kind of see the exposed foundation there and the walkway.
Is there any treatment that's going to be done to the foundation? I know that in the conditions of approval, there was something that was said about that. Whether it was parging or it was like, it could be natural, parged, or something else.
Forged or painted.
Forged or painted. So is it going to continue to look like this without?
It's not it's not finished yet. I think it's my understanding that it's going to be painted, but I am not totally sure about that.
So we do for the new, I guess, newer folks, I think Carrie described this, we can open the record to ask the applicant for further detail on that, but then we would have to allow other public comment again regarding their answer. So
I think the question is, what do you want it to be? Do you want it to be parged? Do you want it to be painted? Do you want it to be planted?
Okay.
I would think planting would be good. Then it would match, if it could match that, because the retaining wall is just on the other end. That we're talking, the 5-foot retaining wall is on the other side of that driveway. Is that right?
it's perpendicular, I think, on
Well,
the back.
yeah, it's like if those two match, that would, I think, be pleasing.
Yeah, I think the back, I got the impression that the vine on the back would be planted on top and then hanging over, whereas this would be, you know, planted below and growing upward.
Going up, that makes sense.
I guess I'm okay with staff's recommendation as it's written, which would require the planting. I don't know if we need to get more specific.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so then on number 9, we will stick with staff's recommendation to accept the change with the proposed mitigation. Okay, number 10, door and window placement on the front is different. Staff's recommendation is to accept the change. It's consistent with design guidelines. I don't have any issue with this one.
No issue here.
I think we should accept the change.
I agree.
Okay, item 11, the rear facade, 4 windows were proposed, now 1 door and 1 window. Also 1 skylight instead of 2. Staff's recommendation is to accept the change. I'm okay with this as well.
I'm okay with it.
I'm okay as well.
I'm also good with it.
Okay, number 12, on the west side, the window placement includes paired windows and the square window is now rectangular. Staff's recommendation is to accept the change. I'm okay with this one.
Same.
Same.
I'm also okay with it.
All right, and then item 13, the east side elevation, 5 windows instead of 2. Staff's recommendation is to accept the change, and I'm good with this one too.
I'm good.
I'm good.
I'm also good.
All right, we're clipping along here. House number 2 now, number 14. The front door and porch added to the east elevation with square window next to entry door. Staff's recommendation is to accept the change. I'm okay with this one.
I'm okay as well.
I'm okay.
Good with me.
All right, number 15, removal of the side porch roof and stair. Staff's recommendation is to accept the change. I'm okay with this.
Same.
Same.
I'm okay with it.
Okay, number 16, the roof cutouts removed. Staff's recommendation is to accept the change. I will say on this one, I think the intent was actually to not have the second story inset deck thing at all. But I think that was our fault for being ambiguous in the way that we worded that one. So I'm okay with this.
Okay. I'm okay as well.
Me too.
Yeah, I'm good with it.
Number 17, windows are not divided light, single light instead. Staff's recommendation is to accept the change. I'm okay with this.
I'm okay as well.
I'm okay.
I'm okay with it.
Okay, number 18, second story window changes. Staff's recommendation is to accept the change. And I'm good with this.
I'm good.
I'm good.
I'm good.
Okay, number 19, so this is the first skylight item. So on the north side elevation, skylight added. Staff's recommendation is to accept the change. As the roof plane is distant from the street and inconspicuous. So I'm a little torn on this one. I think that, you know, there was so much discussion originally about the skylights. I agree they're not particularly desirable in Kenema. I think the preference would have been that they all only faced, you know, inward more so. I don't know that we were clear, you know, certainly I would say we were clear that none of them should directly face the streets, which I would interpret as, you know, Miller and Fourth. As far as visible from the street, that's where it gets kind of iffy. And then this one, so this one does kind of directly face Fourth Avenue, but it is set back. So I'm a little bit, I don't know, I'm interested to hear what everyone else's opinion is on this, I guess.
I believe there's supposed to be a large landscape tree, correct? That's going to eventually grow up and hide that. Is that, I think that was what was proposed in the applicant's materials.
That, yeah, that house is set further back. I will say that it is concerning, but it isn't the most concerning skylight on this list, maybe for me. If you drive past, you don't it doesn't necessarily catch my eye. I feel like it's a little bit further set back than, you know, for instance, house 4, I think it was.
Do we want to kind of discuss the skylights in general, and then so we can kind of apply things consistently as we go through each house?
I think that would be helpful.
That's a good idea.
You know, there are, when I drive through Kenema, I do see skylights from above that you can kind of look down and see. And I do see some skylights that are not in this project that are offset enough from the road that unless you're really looking, they're not that bad. But there are a few skylights, like I think it was houses 4 and 5. I need to bring it up, but that are just pretty obvious from the road. They don't, I guess, technically face the right of way, but that's really splitting hairs, I think. They're very visible from the right of way.
I can pull up photos as needed, so just let me know if there's anything you want to see on the screen.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I definitely agree with you, Carrie, that the skylights on 4 and 5, even though they don't directly face the right of way, are more conspicuous than really the one on number 2.
Yeah, those are definitely more eye-catching and more obvious. I mean, almost glaringly obvious than the one on number 2 is. Especially the one on number 5. It's just, it's pretty rough. I will say when I was looking at skylights and thinking of it as an issue, as I looked at the site, building number 2 didn't stick out in my mind drastically as opposed to the other ones. It didn't make my list of like most egregious.
Did it make your top 10?
No, it didn't.
I agree that 4 and 5 are more conspicuous. I do have to say though that since the roads are so narrow and the houses so compressed up against the street generally in Kenema, I don't find myself looking up at the roof lines. I in fact knew that I needed to look at the skylights when I went and visited the site, and I had to double back to actually look at the skylights. And it could be because I was focused on siding and windows and other things. But they didn't jump out to me necessarily. I know when I look at these pictures, 4 and 5 are the most obvious.
And there are other skylights. I mean, when I really started looking, you know, I did see more and other buildings around, but yeah, 4 and 5 are, I think in my mind, kind of sore thumbs. But I agree with you. It's not, if you're not looking at skylights, maybe it's not as obvious.
I like that they're flat with the roof line, or the plane, the roof plane.
So I think our options would be to allow them all as built on one end. The far end would be none visible from the rights of way, which would require removal of probably all of them, or something in between that would. I think, we have allowed skylights on the non right of way facing sides of roofs previously. I think that just the nature of the way this site is, they are a little more visible and stand out, but I'm kind of inclined to let them stay as is, just based on some of the other skylights that are in the neighborhood and consistency.
So as a whole, you're saying to allow them
I think so.
in-house 2, 4, and 5.
There's, if we kind of went with our traditional condition of, I think, of non-directly facing the right of way, it does, I think, meet that. In some ways, even though I actually, subjectively, number 2 bothers me the least as well, but that's the only one that actually does directly face the right of way. But it is off, it's second tier back, so it's less. But I think 4 and 5 would generally meet, the standard that we've imposed on other houses in the neighborhood.
So like with house 4, although the skylight or skylights are visible from the right of way, they're not facing the right of way.
Right.
You're okay with that? Okay. All right. Makes sense.
That's sort of the same, it's similar to the design guideline we've applied for solar panels and things, as well as that we, generally don't allow them facing directly towards the right of way, but as long as they're flat to the roof, they can be on the.
Yeah.
I could get on board with that. Maybe and maybe this is looking towards the future too much for right now, but I think we really need to define that specific section maybe a little better somehow. But
I'm okay with the skylights as they are placed.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm okay with it then.
All right. Sounds like we have consensus on that then. Okay, so that was number 19. So we'll stick with the staff recommendation. Number 20 is the west side elevation of house number 2. Window placement and sizes changed. And I'm okay with this as is.
I'm okay with it too.
I'm okay with it.
yeah, I'm good with it.
Okay. We're getting there. Number 21 is moving on to house number 3. I think, I don't know, do we want to, I guess there haven't been any objections to the window changes on the elevation. So should we just assume that we're gonna kind of approve all those? And
yeah, I'm okay with that.
Yes.
I'm fine with that.
okay, so that would cover 21, 22, 24, and 27 here. So that leaves 23 is the roof overhang reduced on the west facade. Staff's recommendation is to accept that. I don't have any issue with that one.
No issues.
No issues.
No issue.
Okay. Front door. The porch, then number 25 is porch cover added to the south side elevation. That's same thing. No problem there for me.
No issue.
No problem. Yeah.
And then the last one for number 3 then is item 26, the overall building height increase of 1.5 feet. Staff's recommendation is that it's to accept it as it's consistent with the design guidelines. I think I'm okay with this one as well.
I'm good.
I'm cool with it.
I'm okay.
Okay. Moving on to number 4. Based on our discussions, I think the elevations on the west facade, roof overhang, the north side, south side would all be okay, and the skylights would be okay. So I think, unless I hear any objections, I think we're okay with all of these as with the staff recommendations.
I'm good with 28 through 33.
Same here.
Good for me.
Okay. And then house number 5, the last house. So overall, the building height increase of approximately 3.5 feet. Staff's recommendation is to accept the change as it's consistent with the design guidelines. I will say that this one I'm somewhat torn about because it is, it's directly adjacent to house number 4, and it was a different, in my mind, deliberately a different height from house number 4, so that them being right next to each other, they didn't look identical. It would obviously be a really difficult thing to change. And it does meet the design guidelines as built, but just for, avoiding sort of the cookie cutter type of feel of, infill developments, it's frustrating for me anyway, just to see that height change.
It would have been nice to see it at the original approval, because that does, to me, go right along with the appearance of Keneva and how the houses are what's what I'm looking for. They're not all set back the same. There is that jagged look to it, and that would have, I think, provided some more jagged, but great look to the project and to Kenema. If that made any sense at all.
I got it. Yeah.
But you're right. It's hard to do something about it now.
Change the height of the house.
Is that where you call a ramjack?
I'm sure we can
But
get
no,
some
I'm okay with it.
for it. Is that a tree?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be hard to change the height of a house now. But it is disappointing, I would say.
We could have them put a condition of approval to put a weather vane on top of the house, and that might actually make it look. No, that's a joke, and I'm fine with it as is. Tough to change, but as Carrie said before, ask for forgiveness rather than permission.
Yeah, this is another forgiveness. Yeah, I mean, I would move to accept the change with a bit of distaste.
Yeah.
I accept the condition.
Okay. I think there's consensus then. And then the last items 35 through 39, I think we discussed their window elevation changes, the roof overhang, and the skylights that we've already discussed. So no object or okay with going with the staff recommendations here.
I'm good with 35 through 39.
As am I.
Okay, so I think that's all of the items except for the textured fiber cement siding that remains unresolved.
I don't know.
Going through the list, didn't make any change in how I feel. I'm still torn.
Yeah, it's when I think of it in my mind as an exercise in compromise, I feel like we've given up, high walls, house heights,
Skylights.
skylights, and that kind of solidifies in my mind, in the world of compromise. I think that maybe now I would like to see the siding smooth. I think I would like to see it changed. But I'm open to discussion on it. So change my mind. But
my only hesitation with that, and I agree that it would look better smooth, is that it's just so wasteful to ask them to tear siding off of 5 houses. I mean, because it's not usable again. It would all be broken and landfilled at that point. But I do agree that the precedent that it sets is not great, and it would be better if it was smooth siding. I know that doesn't clarify anything, but I do think it's something that needs to be considered.
I mean, I think that's fair. And I think I'm going to stick with it. We could have avoided all this if a sample had been provided, or or if there was a way that, it's going to take a long time for that siding to wear away and be replaced. But if there's a way to make sure that it is replaced when it is replaced with smooth siding, but I still think I would like to see maybe it changed. It's pretty rough.
Yeah, unfortunately, Carrie, I mean, no one can see, 20 years into the future, but with how this is now, all it would take is for the person or company tearing off 20 years of textured fiber cement to put wood on, just to say, hey, since you did it 20 years ago, oops.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of forgiveness being asked, and I think we conceded some, and I think it's okay to ask for at least something to be corrected. And the siding it's on every house.
Yeah.
I don't think it's unreasonable, especially if it was done in the McLaughlin neighborhood before,
Yeah, I'm gonna side with you, Carrie. I'm gonna ask that we require the change to be made now.
Yeah, I think I concur. That's been a pretty clear policy. There's not really any way that it was, there were some of the other items that, based on language, were maybe we left too ambiguous, but I don't think that there was any interpretation here that, we certainly didn't approve that or leave language open that allowed it. So
yeah.
I will agree with all of you and ask that it be changed then.
I mean, I agree with you. The waste is unfortunate, but it could have been, it's itself been mitigated by the applicant.
Okay, so I think then we would change the, or we would add a condition of approval that the siding be replaced with either the original wood siding or smooth fiber cement siding.
Yeah, I would agree to that.
Yeah, same here.
Agreed.
Okay. And then I think the very last thing is the, that last proposed condition of approval regarding only planting native plants within 50 feet of the wetland border.
Mhm. It wasn't there. Was there two, or was one regarding the siding? Can you pull those back up?
I think
Okay.
one was regarding the vines on the retaining wall, which I think we've already
Okay.
item number 3 and others.
Okay.
Sorry, I can't get PowerPoint to listen to me right now. I'm gonna have to scroll through again. Close your eyes.
Sorry.
That's okay. Can you guys see that now?
Yeah.
Well, I say that I think that I would approve that condition number 4.
I would also approve that condition, just,
I know that Pachysandra is incredibly invasive, and to have it migrate into those wetlands would be a bad idea.
detrimental, especially since they pulled up what it says landscape of dense natural vegetation, immature cliff trees. So keeping as much of that as natural as possible. And then, I mean, like I said, I'm not a plant person, but an invasive species in Kenema could have a much more detrimental effect on the entire neighborhood than, skylights or siding, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I do have a question though, about when these houses are sold and then there are owners who have them. I mean, is this condition going to stay, or if somebody owns, house number 5 and they decide to do some landscaping work, is that something that's going to come back before us, or are they going to have to adhere to these conditions?
I can answer that, or I can try to answer that, Grant.
Yeah, please go ahead.
We typically don't. It's hard to enforce once the houses are sold and people make landscaping changes, throughout Kenema. And we have not really had any success, I guess, or we don't have the capacity to enforce landscaping design guidelines once houses are sold and ownership changes. However, there are mechanisms that we use sometimes to make sure that certain landscaping remains in place, or that there are restrictions, and that can be done through a covenant that is recorded onto the title of the property, and runs with the land. So if it's sold, that covenant is still applies. And so we do have documents that we use to make sure that trees are a certain number of trees remain on the property, or on other sites, or that like a conservation easement or some sort of covenant to require certain plantings and landscaping plants be adhered to in the future. So that is something that we kind of have that written up already, at least, or very similar things that we could probably utilize in this case if you wanted to include something like that.
I was just curious because I know, people tend to do what they will with their properties as far as plantings go. And that can change very frequently. I do think it would be great to somehow maybe make sure that nothing non-native gets planted close to the wetland. I don't know. Does anybody else feel like that's important? Or
I think it's important. I think that Kenema has a lot of invasive species already, so it's hard to single out. Certainly the site, I think it was full of blackberries, just before overgrown with that before this.
I see. So it's slightly moot.
I kind of feel that. I mean, I think that the condition to not plant something that's going to grow into the wetland, quickly is valid. Trying to enforce it over time when a lot of the other neighboring properties are, I think it would be maybe heavy-handed.
That makes sense. Okay.
Yeah.
If I may ask a question regarding the siding condition. So just to confirm, I have the applicant shall replace the siding on all the homes with wood siding or smooth fiber cement siding. Want to make sure that's what you want. And then we don't have a lot of findings right now in the staff report to support the condition. And so I think we'd want to probably add a few sentences of findings to support that for why the board finds that the textured fiber cement siding is not, does not meet the design guidelines. So, I mean, I know we talked about, we've always required smooth, and we required it to be replaced in McLaughlin, but is there anything specific that you want to add about why the textured fiber cement is not compatible?
Yeah, I think we could add, that the artificial texture of the siding is not consistent with the historic nature of the contributing structures, and that the homes are located close enough to the public right-of-ways that the texture is visible or identifiable, I guess, easily visible.
Could we also say, I don't know, is it possible to also just say that it could be used as a precedent for larger, more intrusive structures in the neighborhood, and therefore would set a bad precedent in the future?
Yeah. Or also noting that, though it's not one large structure like some of the other ones built, it is 5 separate structures. So,
Yeah,
there's a lot of it, and it's spread over a wide area. It's, it's noticeable on a larger scale, and it is very noticeable in that corner of Kenema. It's 5 buildings. 6.
Thanks, that's helpful.
All right. I think unless anyone has any other items to bring up, I think we're ready for a motion.
trying to think of how you would word that.
Yeah, I would motion to approve this the site change packet. I don't know, what do we call this thing?
It has application numbers, I guess, so the HR
Yeah.
21
So
1 through 05.
I'd like to make a motion to approve GLUA -21-00001, HR 21-00001 through 00005, historic review for Kanema cottages in the Kanema National Register Historic District, with the additions of condition of approval 4, 5, and changes to description 4 under site overall. Is there any ones I'm missing? Am I getting off track?
I think you could reference the conditions in the staff presentation so that would include these two on the screen right now. And then
Okay.
these three. And then the board added so in addition to those 5, you've added a condition to replace the siding and a condition to screen the exposed foundation.
Screen exposed. And you said change siding. So do I have to start over?
No, I think you can just say so moved.
So moved.
And then we need a second.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, board member Ferry,
Aye.
board member Crook,
Aye.
board member Stobie,
Aye.
and Chair Blythe.
Hi. All right, very good. Thanks for everyone's patience on that item. I think it was worth our time, though, to be thorough as we went through it. That'll close the public hearing portion of the agenda, and we'll move into any communications.
Yes, thanks. I have one announcement to make, or I guess 2. Trying to find an email from Parks Department. So our Parks Department is Parks and Recreation is very wonderful. They manage the Ermatinger House, among other historic properties, and they have a Preserve Our Past contest that they wanted you to know about. It is art and poetry contest for teenagers or ages 11 to 15. It can win up to $150. That way it works is they choose a historic site, landmark, or story in Oregon City, create a piece of art or a poem that celebrates the history, and enters a submission by May 15th. And so we have information in the Trail News that's coming out in April about that, and I will forward you the information too, so you can share it. May is Preservation Month, so this is kind of one of the city's Preservation Month activities that we can do in a socially distanced manner. Usually we also award a preservation award to, a local project or person or group that has done something great in the past year as it relates to historic preservation. So it's really wide open, and I think last year we awarded it to, oh gosh, I might have been gone on maternity leave last year, so I don't remember. But the last one I remember was the historic home on Washington Street that did some really nice window replacements using our grant program, not replacements, window repair projects using our grant program. So if you all, I don't have any suggestions at the moment for that award, but the board decides, essentially who gets the award each year. And we can generally do that over email as long as there's consensus. And so if you have any ideas or you've noticed anybody doing great work out in the community, please let me know. And then I will coordinate that among board members. And then the city commission presents the award in May for Preservation Month. And that's all I have.
I would add, since we've given out some preservation grant money throughout the year, is there one that would be considered? I forget who we've given awards to.
We gave a grant for Vicky Gackley, who owns the properties on 14th near Main Street, and she actually won the award a couple of years ago for one of those homes, and now she's restoring another one.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't have any great ideas this year, unfortunately, but I've also been working from home and not out in the community a lot to see what's going on. We don't have to decide tonight. So yeah, just send me anything you think of.
Okay. Well, in that case, I guess we will go ahead and adjourn for the evening at 9:48 p.m. Thanks again for everybody's patience. I know it's hopefully not every meeting will be quite so tedious.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.